I was halfway through mowing the back acre when I saw her, Pamela Vickerson, HOA board president and full-time pain in everyone's rear, marching straight toward me in her ridiculous wedge heels and oversized sunglasses like she was going to war. I shut off the tractor engine and stood up. "Afternoon, Pamela." She didn't even fake a smile. "Xander Preston," she snapped, arms crossed so tight it looked like she was trying to strangle herself. "That tractor is in clear violation of HOA noise ordinances. Section 12, subparagraph 3. I wiped the sweat from my brow. "I'm on my own property, Pamela. This is rural zoning. I've got 10 acres and a John Deere. Comes with the territory." Pamela's nostrils flared like she was trying to sniff out a lawsuit. "This subdivision is under HOA jurisdiction, and I've had multiple complaints about the noise. It's disturbing the peace." I chuckled. "The only thing disturbing the peace around here is you." That didn't go over well. The next morning, I got a letter taped to my front gate, HOA violation notice. Claimed I was operating industrial equipment during non-approved hours. Said I'd be fined $100 per occurrence, which was funny considering our HOA rules never once mentioned tractors. I built this house myself 10 years ago, long before the HOA existed. They only formed when some city folks bought up the lots across the road and decided the countryside needed order. Pamela led that charge, of course. I wasn't about to let some clipboard dictator tell me how to maintain my own land. I kept mowing, tilling, and hauling just like I always did. That's when things escalated. 2 days later, I saw a guy parked across the road in a black sedan, filming me while I worked. Same guy showed up 3 times in 1 week. I waved once. He ducked behind the dash like a scared possum. The following Friday, I got another notice, this one with photos of me on the tractor, timestamps, and a new fine, $500. Said I was willfully ignoring HOA directives and disrupting community harmony. Now I was mad. I drove straight to the county zoning office, stack of HOA letters in hand. The clerk, a guy named Milo who looked like he'd rather be fishing, flipped through them, then raised an eyebrow. "Wait, they fined you for using a tractor? On your AG zone land?" I nodded. He turned to his computer, typed something, and then grinned. "Well, they just stepped in it. County Code 8.14.2, agricultural activity on AG-zoned private property is protected from nuisance claims, including noise complaints, unless it violates state law. Which this doesn't. So, what can I do?" I asked. "Oh, you don't have to do anything," Milo said, printing something from the computer. "You just handed me proof of HOA harassment. That's a civil violation under County Code 11.03.5. I'll file it today." I left the office with a copy of the complaint and a bit of a spring in my step. Pamela had picked the wrong tractor to mess with. Saturday morning, I was hosing mud off the trailer when Deputy Caleb Rooker pulled into my gravel drive. He stepped out slow, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding a folded paper. "Xander," he called out, voice casual but firm. "Deputy, you hear about the tractor?" I asked, tossing the hose aside and wiping my hands on a rag. Caleb nodded, approaching with a practiced calm. "Got a notice from the county civil enforcement office. They asked me to document property conditions for a harassment complaint. HOA involvement." "Pamela," I said. "She's been manufacturing violations and sending photographers to stake me out." He shook his head slightly. I figured. "You mind if I take a quick walk around, snap a few pictures? County wants proof you're not running a concert venue out here." I laughed, gesturing toward the wide pasture. "Be my guest. Just watch out for the rooster, he's territorial." Caleb took his time, pausing now and then to jot something in his notepad. When he returned, he handed me a copy of the documentation. "You're clean. No zoning violations, no prohibited use. I'll file this with civil enforcement today." As the deputy drove off, I spotted a white SUV creeping past my front gate. Not slowing down exactly, just enough for the driver to stare long and hard. I caught a glimpse of a clipboard in the passenger seat. I didn't need a closer look to know who it was. That afternoon, I decided it was time to get ahead of her game. I called my cousin Ellie, who worked in the county recorder's office. She owed me a favor from back when I pulled her car out of a ditch during a snowstorm. Ellie, I said. I need every filing Pamela Vickerson's HOA has submitted in the last 12 months. All of it. Meeting minutes, officer appointments, budget statements, amendment filings, everything that's public. There was a pause. Then you might want to sit down when you see this mess. 3 days later, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox, along with a USB stick. Ellie had gone above and beyond. She'd highlighted discrepancies in the meeting logs and flagged suspicious budget items. According to the filings, the HOA had funneled over $22,000 into something labeled Community Harmony Initiative. I opened the USB on my laptop. Inside was an audio file titled, March Board Meeting Unedited. I clicked play. Pamela's voice rang out clearly, followed by a few others I didn't recognize. We'll adjust the minutes later. Just note that the vote passed unanimously. No one needs to know Harold voted against the sound ordinance. Then another voicemail, gruff. That's not how this works, Pamela. I'm not signing off on fake minutes. Her tone sharpened. Then you'll be removed from the board, Harold. We've done it before. I paused the audio. She wasn't just fining people. She was altering official records and threatening board members. That crossed the line from irritating to criminal. The next morning, I drove straight to the county district attorney's office. I asked to speak to a public integrity investigator. After showing them the paperwork, the USB, and the audio file, they brought me into a private interview room. The investigator, a woman named Rivachin, listened carefully, her expression unreadable as the audio played. You're telling me this HOA rewrote official meeting minutes and threatened elected board members? She asked afterward. I slid the paperwork across the table. Those budget irregularities don't smell right either. Riva tapped her pen against her notebook. This qualifies as evidence tampering and possibly embezzlement. I'll need sworn statements from you and anyone else who can corroborate this. Do you know Harold's last name? Bixby. Retired electrician. He lives 2 houses down from me. That afternoon, Harold and I sat across from each other on his porch. His hands trembled slightly as he poured lemonade. I told her it was unethical, he said, voice low. She said if I didn't toe the line, I'd be removed like the last guy. That was Donnie Parker. He caught her reallocating funds to pay for some landscaping deal with her brother-in-law. She's got a pattern, I muttered. Harold looked me in the eye. You gonna bring her down? I nodded. Already started. Over the next 10 days, Riva's office gathered statements from 6 current and former HOA members. All had similar stories, falsified votes, missing funds, threats of retaliation. One woman broke down crying during her affidavit, saying Pamela had told her she'd be sued if she ever spoke to residents outside board meetings. Then the subpoenas went out. I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. Then, one morning, I stepped outside to grab the paper and saw 2 unmarked county vehicles parked outside Pamela's house. Investigators in plain clothes stood on her porch while she argued with them, flailing her arms. They entered her home with a warrant in hand. The neighborhood buzzed for days. People who usually avoided eye contact now stopped to chat. Mrs. Valenzuela, who lived across the street and always kept to herself, brought me a peach cobbler and said, it's about time someone took a stand. By the end of the month, the county board suspended the HOA's enforcement authority pending a full audit. A temporary administrator was appointed until a new election could be held. I received a formal apology letter from the County Civil Enforcement Office, along with a certified statement declaring I was in full compliance with all regional zoning laws. And Pamela? She was charged with falsifying public records, misappropriation of funds, and harassment through misuse of authority. Her court date was set for early spring. I never saw the black sedan again. As for my tractor, I added a fresh coat of paint and bolted a small metal sign to the side right under the seat. It read, "Freedom runs on diesel." The next time I fired it up, the sound echoed across the fields loud and proud, and no one dared say a word. By the time the autumn leaves turned gold and red across the hills, the neighborhood had changed. You could feel it in the way people walked their dogs slower, more relaxed. No clipboard patrols, no anonymous notes in mailboxes. Even the wind felt less tense. But I knew Pamela's mess ran deeper than what had already floated to the surface. One morning, I was in the shed rebuilding a carburetor when Harold showed up again, this time with a folder under his arm and a look somewhere between nervous and determined. He didn't knock, just stepped into the open doorway and said flat, "You need to see this." I set down the wrench. "Something new." He handed me the folder and nodded. "I found it in the HOA's cloud account. Pamela never changed the password after she pushed Donnie out. I guess she didn't expect anyone to still have access. Inside were emails. Dozens of them. Most were boring reminders for meetings, discussions on pool maintenance, but then I found a thread tagged Noise Management Initiative. It was between Pamela and a guy named Robert Stiles, who turned out to be an acoustic consultant from a private firm in the next county over. "I thought this was about complaints," I said, flipping through the pages, "but she hired a noise auditor?" Harold pointed to one of the emails. "Keep reading." The email from Pamela was dated just 2 months before she first approached me. It read, "If we can establish a precedent of non-compliance with neighborhood sound thresholds, we can justify a restrictive amendment. Once passed, we can reclassify his equipment as disruptive machinery and force a lien if he refuses to comply." I stared at the page, the words sinking like rocks. She was building a case. Engineering it. "Exactly," Harold said. "She wanted to drive you out. She said in another email that your land disrupts the aesthetic unity of the community." I didn't reply. I just flipped to the last document. It was a contract. Pamela had signed off on a $3,000 payment to Stiles' firm using HOA funds without a board vote. That alone was illegal. But what caught my eye was the clause at the bottom: "Client acknowledges the service is for strategic planning purposes and not intended for official code enforcement." So she paid a consultant to fabricate a report that sounded official, then used it to justify fines, harassment, and surveillance. I called Riva. This time she didn't ask questions. She asked for copies and told me to forward everything immediately. Within 48 hours, the county prosecutor filed additional charges. Pamela was now facing fraudulent misuse of association funds, conspiracy to commit property interference, and falsification of private contracts. The sheriff's department dispatched a forensic tech to recover the original files from the HOA's cloud server. But it didn't stop there. The prosecutor's office opened a broader inquiry into the HOA's financial dealings. Turns out Pamela hadn't been acting alone. Treasurer Neil Creighton and Vice President Karen Flemings had both signed off on multiple unauthorized expenses that violated the HOA's charter. The worst one, a $28,000 landscaping project billed to the HOA but completed on Karen's private property, including a new stone patio and custom irrigation system. The receipts were disguised under the line item, "Park Drainage Improvements." County investigators photographed everything, subpoenaed bank statements, and interviewed vendors. The contractor who completed the work admitted he was told it was for a community common area. He never saw a park. When the news finally broke, it hit the local paper's front page. The headline read, "HOA Board under criminal investigation for fraud, misuse of funds." A photo underneath showed Pamela being escorted out of her house with her handbag clutched to her side and her sunglasses off for once. She looked stunned. I was back on the tractor when Channel 9 sent a reporter out to the property. A young guy in a windbreaker asked if I'd be willing to speak on camera. "Only if you don't edit my words to make it sound like I hate HOAs in general," I said. "I hate corrupt HOAs." He laughed. "Fair enough." I kept it simple. Explained how I'd built this place with my own hands, how I followed every law on the books, how I'd never had a single problem before Pamela's crew came in with their fake ordinances and personal vendettas. The next day, the city council announced it was reviewing the charter that allowed volunteer HOAs to impose binding fines without municipal oversight. That hadn't happened in over 70 years. A councilwoman reached out and asked if I'd be willing to testify at a public hearing. I agreed. The hearing was held in the town hall auditorium. I wore my cleanest flannel and boots that didn't have fresh oil on them. I brought copies of the zoning laws, the audio recordings, the forged documents, everything we'd uncovered. When my name was called, the room quieted. I stepped up to the lectern and cleared my throat. "I'm not a lawyer," I began. I'm not a politician. I'm a guy who owns land and wants to be left alone to take care of it. But I've learned more about legal codes in the past 3 months than I ever wanted to. And what I found is that people like Pamela Vickerson can twist a system meant to protect communities into a weapon for their own control. A few council members nodded. One took notes. I continued, she didn't just violate policy. She violated trust. She used the HOA to punish people she didn't like. And the only reason she got away with it as long as she did was because there was no oversight. When I stepped down, the room applauded. 3 weeks later, the council passed a temporary moratorium on all HOA enforcement actions countywide pending a review. They also established a task force to create a new licensing requirement for HOA boards, mandatory ethics training, financial disclosure, and a rotating third-party audit every year. Back in the neighborhood, things were calmer. Karen and Neil resigned before charges could be filed, leaving the board empty. The county appointed a neutral administrator to oversee operations until a new election could be held. Harold agreed to run for president if I helped him campaign. I told him I'd build the signs. As for Pamela, her trial was set for early summer. She was out on bond, but a court order barred her from communicating with any HOA members or setting foot on common property. One afternoon, as I was loading firewood into the bed of my truck, I noticed a new family moving into the house 2 doors down, the one where the guy used to film me from his car. The black sedan was gone. In its place was a rusty pickup and 3 kids running barefoot through the yard. The father caught me watching and waved. "Hey neighbor," he called. "Place looks great." I waved back. "Yours too." He grinned. "Heard we used to have some troublemakers here." "That true?" I tossed the last log into the bed. "Not anymore." Then I climbed into the cab, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life. Not a single curtain twitched. Not a single complaint. Just the sound of a man getting things done on his own land. The frost was just lifting off the grass when I got the call from Riva. Her voice was sharper than usual, focused, like someone who'd just opened a file and realized it was bigger than expected. "They kept a second set of books." I leaned against the fence post, still holding a half-full mug of coffee. "You're sure?" "They used HOA reserve funds to create a shadow account. It was labeled community outreach, but the transactions don't match any known projects. No permits, no contracts, no vendor reports. Just withdrawals. Over $60,000 in 2 years. I let out a slow breath. Where did it go? We traced some of it to a company in Nevada registered under a Shell LLC. Guess who's listed as the managing partner? I already knew. Pamela Vickerson, yes. But also one Robert Stiles, the same consultant she hired to draft the sound reports. They didn't just misuse funds, they laundered them. I stared out across the field, the sunrise casting long shadows through the fence line. That's organized fraud. And conspiracy, Riva added. We're escalating it to the state attorney general's office. This is no longer just a local prosecution. By midweek, state investigators were on site. They showed up in plain vehicles, but everyone in the neighborhood noticed the suits and the clipboards. They moved methodically, checking HOA records, interviewing vendors, inspecting HOA-owned assets. One team went straight to the clubhouse and retrieved 2 locked filing cabinets. Another visited the landscaping company that had done the phony park improvements. None of this went unnoticed. That Friday, Harold and I were setting up folding chairs outside the newly reopened community center for the town hall election forum. For the first time, the entire neighborhood had been invited to vote on a new board under state oversight. A temporary administrator had certified the ballots, and each candidate had to sign a disclosure form confirming no prior affiliation with the former board. "You think they'll show?" Harold asked, motioning toward the row of seats. "They've spent the last year being told what color to paint their doors and when to mow their lawns," I said. "They'll show." By 7, every chair was filled. Some folks stood along the fence line, arms crossed, eyes focused. The administrator, a woman named Rosalind sent from the state's HOA Oversight Bureau, introduced herself with a tone that could cut granite. No candidate tonight will serve more than a single interim term, she said. This is about restoring trust and establishing transparency. Tonight, you ask questions. They answer. Then we vote. I didn't run. My place was the field, not the boardroom. But Harold stood behind the mic and gave a short, steady speech about accountability and neighborly respect. He didn't promise to fix everything. Just to listen, to follow the law, and to never write a fine on a napkin. After the forum, I was loading up the chairs when Roslyn approached. You made this possible, she said plainly. If you ever want to work on HOA policy reform at the state level, I'd be happy to refer you. I shook my head. I appreciate it. But I've got fences to mend and a generator that won't fix itself. She smiled faintly, then turned and left without another word. The next week, Pamela was indicted on 5 felony counts. The grand jury returned the charges unanimously. Embezzlement, wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, falsifying financial records, and retaliatory harassment. Stiles was arrested in Las Vegas and extradited. He flipped within 48 hours, handing over emails, wire instructions, even voice memos where Pamela bragged about reigning in the rural holdouts. Her trial date was set and bail was denied. She was too much of a flight risk, according to the judge. Her lawyer tried to argue she was a community pillar, but the prosecutor countered with a photo of the fake invoices and a witness list that included 5 former board members and 3 vendors she'd stiffed. Back in the neighborhood, change came fast. The new board, led by Harold and 2 longtime residents, voted to dissolve all previously issued fines unless they were tied to actual legal violations. They also passed a resolution preventing the HOA from hiring private consultants without a public vote and third-party verification. But the cherry on top? The county levied a civil penalty against the old HOA board for harassment under Local Code 11.03.5. That same clause I triggered with my original complaint. The fine, $12,000, payable directly into a community relief fund to offset improperly assessed dues. Pamela's name was stripped from all public HOA records. Her house went up for sale, then foreclosure. No one bid on it. The bank eventually sold it to a retired couple from Alabama who just wanted a quiet place to garden and raise chickens. They asked if the neighborhood allowed tractors. I told them, loud ones. They laughed and invited me over for sweet tea the following Sunday. The blacktop roads still got its potholes. The clubhouse still smells faintly of mildew when it rains. And the weeds still come back every spring. But now, when I fire up the tractor before dawn to prep the soil, I don't see cars slowing down to glare. I see porch lights flicker on. I hear the clink of coffee mugs against porch rails. Sometimes someone even waves. It's not perfect, but it's honest. And the sound of that diesel engine? It's no longer a nuisance. It's a reminder that this land, this work, this life, it's not theirs to regulate. It's mine to live.